Hey, my name is Joe Hudson, and I am the founder of One Earth Capital and View Workshops. And today we're going to be talking about how to get everybody who's talking out of ego in your meetings to be silent. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes absolutely everything. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? Well, today we're going to take a look at the potential connection between venture capital and human awakening. Stay tuned to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any of our past episodes by going to Facebook and looking for our group in there, Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, want to thank you. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to iTunes or one of those other sites that you normally go to. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. I promise you it really helps us. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Las Vegas to Philadelphia to Florida, and now in Washington, D.C., in the Quantico area. You can also catch us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, regular viewer, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Because of you, we are the #1 podcast in the world for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners. For every show, we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And of course, you can also catch us on Spotify, Google Home, Alexa, any of those places by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Whether you're a leader, a C-suite leader, CEO, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that the world seems to be in a sort of polarized flux. On one side, there's these, the one-time peaceful hippies are now punching people in the face who are saying things that they find offensive and screaming socialism for all. On the other side, all over the world, we are seeing the rise of democratically elected autocratic leaders telling folks that they're the only ones who can save their country. And then seemingly in the middle is the rise of what's known as conscious capitalism, the B Corp, those who want to use business for good. But you may be standing on the sidelines thinking, well, I'm just trying to do business. But is there a way to become more conscious and profitable? Well, let's find out together. Our guest on this episode is Mr. Joe Hudson. Joe Hudson has been the managing director of One Earth Capital, an organization that supports scalable companies that are focused on increasing self-awareness to the mass market. Before this, Joe Hudson spearheaded the first venture capital firm to focus on sustainable agriculture and was the largest investor in the first sustainable agriculture IPO on the NASDAQ. Joe is committed to a life of self-exploration across dozens of psychological, neurological, and spiritual traditions. He is passionate about sharing his gifts of exploration with others. Please help me welcome a man whose purpose is improving self-awareness of humanity through investing in startups, philanthropy, and creating transformational experiences for business leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Joe Hudson. Welcome, sir.
Hi. Nice to be here, Paul.
Good to have you here, mate. So you have definitely been on an interesting journey. And before we dive into that, I want to ask you a little off-target question, which is, When we as leaders, people look at us and they say, well, who was your greatest inspiration? And we often name people like, Martin Luther King or whoever it might have been for that person. But what I'm always interested in is who was someone we likely wouldn't know who's been a major influence on your life?
Yeah, that's an easy question. It's a guy named Case DeBron who unfortunately passed away 3 or 4 years ago. I was invested in a company that was doing amazing things in the world. It saved 1 trillion gallons annually of water in California alone. It was an amazing company. And it was a complete, I don't know if I can swear on this, but you can swear. It was a shit show as far as the management goes. And so I found this guy who was Case, who was living in Amsterdam at the time, and brought him in to help fix the culture of the company. And the thing about Case was he had this capacity that was unreal. He could do 2 things. The first thing he could do was he could sell, if he believed in something, he could sell almost anything without making hardly a statement at all. He would just ask questions. Mm-hmm. And just through the question process, there would be this moment of discovery where the person would buy the product. And I watched him do it several times. And he was this very effeminate man. And I would watch him do this with hardcore farmers who were super conservative. It was amazing to watch. Wow. And the other thing that he could do was he could sit and talk to an executive, and inside of about an hour, they would see their life completely differently. And it was the same process. He was doing the same thing in both the sales and in the personal development world. And he was just amazing. And I wanted to learn what he did. And he'd always say, this can't be taught. I think he had a bit of a need to be special, and he was special. And anyways, so he developed cancer and he couldn't get the treatment he wanted. And so I invited him to my home in California where he could get the treatment that he wanted. And I got to watch him work 3-4 times a week.
Wow.
I can get emotional about it. And when I saw what he was doing, and then I learned it just by osmosis more than anything. And he passed away, interestingly, of a heart attack, cured his own cancer, passed away from heart attack. And when he died, I was like, oh, there's got to be other people who can do this. And so I went around the world looking for those people who could create a deep level of epiphany and self-awareness in a really short span of time for people. And I looked at what they were doing and what was in common with them. And so he was the first person to really teach me and show me that if you learn about yourself, you learn your self-awareness. If you understand yourself better, you'll understand the people that you work with better, and that's good for business. And he was the first person that I saw bring really crisp, sharp business tools that worked in business, but also worked to help the customer and him become more self-aware. So it wasn't just selling, it was like we're selling and we're learning about ourselves at the same time, and it was effective. And that opened up a whole world for me about what other tools, can we do this in marketing? Can we do this in management? Like, what are the tools that we can bring to the world where we learn about ourselves and the people we're interacting with learn about themselves more, and we're effective at business. And so
beautiful.
That was the inspiration. Yeah.
When was that?
Oh, about 5 years ago.
Oh, so it's fairly recent.
Yeah. That part of it was, yes. For me, I mean, I've been on self-exploration since I was like 24. That was my first 10-day meditation retreat.
Well, I believe that your fiance at the time, now wife, changed the direction of your life. A little bit of that. Tell us a little bit about how you proposed and what happened as a result.
Yeah. My wife's amazing. We've been married just 20 years now. And when I proposed to her, she said, okay, 2 conditions. First condition is that we had to travel through Southeast Asia for 4 or 5 months because that was the hardest thing she'd ever done, backpacking. And if we could do that and survive, she thought we could survive marriage. And she was right. It was the most difficult thing we did until we had kids. And
yeah, minor detail there, right?
Luckily, we had 7 years to learn about ourselves to get to before we had kids. And then the second thing is she said she wanted me to do a 10-day meditation retreat. So
Vipassana.
Having done no meditation at all and thinking that it was all just about being silent for 10 days, I did my first 10-day silent meditation retreat, and that changed my life. Absolutely.
So your first Vipassana, she was inspired by her.
Yeah.
You know, I did Vipassana the first time, I think almost 40 years ago. And I know that it definitely changed my, the way that I saw the interaction with myself is the simplest way of saying it. What was it for you? What was it that it awakened in you?
Yeah, well, two things happened. I think the first one was that it was the first kind of moment that I realized that, which I now neurologically can explain, which is that my decision-making process is not intellectual.
Of course not.
We think it is, but neurologically we know it's not.
It's called rationalizing, making rational lies.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, we're using rationality to figure out how to feel the way we want to feel, right?
Absolutely.
If you just ask yourself the question, how much of my life was created because I didn't want to feel like a failure, or because I wanted to feel like a success? It's just, 30% of your decisions right there were made.
Absolutely.
So that was the first one, where I realized that there was a somatic process happening that actually determined a lot of what I did. An emotional, physical process. And then the second thing it did is I had this, it got me hooked. It was, it was a great drug dealer. On day 3 of the Vipassana sit, I had an experience a physical experience of oneness that lasted about 8 seconds. And I was just like, it created a bit of hell, because I then chased it, which was my mentality at the time.
Of course.
And so 10 years of chasing it, and until the journey or the search ended. But that deep level of discovery of like, this is possible within me, and then going and collecting tons and tons of tools across all different forms for a decade. And this was, over 20 years ago. I just started taking in everything I could, from, somatic therapy to EMDR to the Hoffman process, and just collected everything that I could about how to get back there, only to find out that I'd never left. But that's
right.
Story. Yeah.
But, and this is an important thing, is the understanding that the pathway to heaven and hell is the mind. And so the pathway to access one's soul is the mind, but you have to leave the mind behind in order to enter in. And what we do, because we're a mind-driven culture, is we think, well, if I follow the mind all the way through, it'll get me there. No, there's a point when you actually have to abandon that. And that's not something that people can easily grasp, and that's no disrespect to anybody. It's because the tools for developing a high level of IQ don't work in there. And I've often described it as, and we've all heard the analogy before, taking a hammer and using it as every tool, as the saw, as the screwdriver. It doesn't work. And that, what you talked about there is, you go and you gather all the tools, and they're all great tools. I mean, I'm familiar with most of those tools. I'm trained in most of those tools, and they're great tools. And they're wonderful, but they're tools.
Yeah. And
the truth of the matter is, this process works wonderful for this person, but it doesn't work for that person, because everybody's so unique. But we go, oh, but Joe did that, and it worked for Joe, so I'm going for Vipassana. Well, I sat there, and now I want to kill myself. I sat there, and I worked out all these strategies. No, because that was what Joe did for Joe. I did Vipassana. It was wonderful. I've done it dozens of times. It was wonderful. Is it my primary tool? It's not. Is it a wonderful tool? It is. Is it a great tool for you? Possibly.
Yeah, that's right.
Possibly.
I would even say it is like Like if you look at the traditional medicines of China and India and Tibet, if you look at it, the way they think about it is, what's right for you is dependent on where you come from, what season it is, what time of day it is.
Absolutely.
Like we are evolving creatures. What's right for an oak tree is different in the summer than it is in the fall. It's different when it's a sapling to when it's 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to think about it like I want just a quick answer to figure it out. And there are some things that are very, we all, like there are tools to work with like working with our emotions is an important thing. How you do it is different. Working with the intellect is an important thing. How you do it is different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to sort of change gears a little bit here, because this I found very interesting, and I think it's a great way for people to grasp the rationale, the commerce of all of this. You got involved in sustainable agriculture. You were as I said in the introduction, you were the first backer into this. So talk to us a little bit about that journey, because it seems like that was a catalyst in many ways too for you.
Yeah, it definitely was. First backer of sustainable ag, no, but as a venture capitalist, we were the first company to focus.
That's what I meant.
I just want to.
Yeah, I wasn't clear.
Yeah. There was a tremendous amount of learnings for me there. The first learning was that my best investment was my worst investment, and my worst investment was my best investment. Meaning, the thing that I was trying to do in the world was not always tied into financial results, even though the company was doing better. So there's it's all the meta market trends and the who you knows, so to speak. And so that was an interesting. But what the biggest thing that came to me through that process was it's this idea that I saw great stuff. I saw this company as an example that could turn cow manure, which is one of the biggest polluters on the planet, into biodiesel. And they could do it economically. You could measure it. It worked 15 years ago. It's still not out there in the world, right? There is golden rule of venture capitals. There is no idea so good, bad management can't screw it up. And so
what a nice way to put it. I've heard it spelled differently.
Yeah.
Diode was an F, but
it usually is, yeah. And and when you look at what the problem is, it's always human ego. And people think ego means I think I'm really cool, but ego also means I need to be special. It also means I'm not good enough. It also means I need to prove myself. Any kind of self-definition that's limiting, I call ego, and that's
ego is also, just for everybody to grasp this for a minute. Ego is about keeping things the same. So if you feel like a piece of shit, and you complain about feeling like a piece of shit, and nobody loves you, you're actually doing behaviors that keep you in that place. If you say business is struggling and it never grows, and I never get the opportunities, that's ego. Yeah. So, we think of ego as being this person with orange skin who lives in a big White House in Washington. We might think of that as being ego, but it's also the person who is so self-destructive. That's also their ego.
Yes.
So anything that keeps things sustained, because ego sees safe and same as identical. And so that is part of the problem when we're trying to bring new technology forward, even in clean, I want to go back into the mine and dig and fill my lungs with shitty air, yeah, rather than get retrained so I can work in clean air.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's for us to grasp that ego is not the ba-ba, here I am. That's just one facet of it.
One facet. Yeah. The other thing I noticed about ego is you're in it when you're in a comparative mind or you're strategizing.
Very good. Yeah.
Strategizing with any kind of fear, or you're in a comparative mind, immediately that ego's got you.
Yeah.
But what I learned was all of our problems are caused by that. They're not caused by global warming. They're not caused by political situations. They're caused by us not understanding ourselves and understanding what actually makes us happy, and that our strategies for that are wrong. And what I noticed is when people started to have epiphanies about themselves, everything changed. How they spent their money changed, how they spent their carbon changed, how they spent their time changed, how they spent their relationships changed. And that's when I said, I'm working on a symptom. I'm not working on the cause. I need to work on the actual cause, which is human consciousness. And that's what made me pivot. As that set of investments closed down, I pivoted to consciousness.
So as somebody who owned a seminar company, who, we provided consciousness programs and developed people, leaders for more than 20 years. Outside of my corporate work, this, to the general public and to leaders in smaller groups, etc. That would appear to me, my bias, would appear to be less fruitful at a not in a fulfillment level, but in a quote success level, than being a venture capitalist. And I know you've pivoted away from the venture capital into the consciousness, and that being the main focus. Tell us about what's made you, because that's a big bet. That's all the chips are on black.
Yeah. It's a great question. I don't need to. Partially, I don't need to worry about money. And I've never done any of this for the money. So money's never been a motivator for me. I've always seen it as pertinent and a tool and useful, and I love it. And I don't dance because it plays the music. Mm-hmm. So that's partially, but even strategically, what I've noticed is, I'm here for the impact. And what I've noticed is I can invest in, so if I'm investing, and I invested in consciousness for a while, if I'm investing, I have to find all the things that regular venture capitalists are looking for, which is a tough thing to find. That's good. Mm-hmm. And then you also have to find a leader who's competent, which is the main thing a venture capitalist is looking for. And then you've got to find one who actually wants to run a company where that it's a path to their own freedom, that the company is a path to its own freedom, which logically makes a crap ton of sense. Just in the thought process of, if I say to you, hey, join a company and we're going to save the world, you kind of get excited. Like most people are like, cool, I'm doing something of meaning, and that keeps me motivated. But what people really want is that they're working towards something that's important to their life. They're interested in like, hey, let's work together to get on a team that feels awesome to be a part of, that gets stuff done, that is motivating, that we're changing ourselves, we're growing here, that like we can depend on each other. It's not political. Everybody wants that lifestyle. Like I don't care who you are, you want to be a part of that team. We all have that memory of that team out there. So if I can infect 1,000 teams with that thought process, mm-hmm. and give them the tools to actually create that, that's so much more impactful than the 6 or 7 investments that I can make as an investor in a 10-year period of time. So that's one thing. As far as my own personal finances go, I'm not having any problem making money on this so far. I mean, I started it like 3 years ago doing experiments to find out. I wanted to create something that was deeply impactful inside of companies. I wanted to create something that was deeply impactful for people coming and spending a week. We iterated and iterated and iterated. We found something that just is 90% of the time shifting people's consciousness to and we're blending all these tools that I investigated, and it's amazing. So everybody that I interact with, it usually means 3 or 4 more customers. So my biggest problem isn't getting more customers. My biggest problem is training people to be able to do what I do. And that's the tougher part.
But that's the part you just brought up something, which was, you're talking about the gentleman right at the beginning who was your greatest influence, who said, well, you can't train people in this, but you are actually training people in it.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about that and how that works, because, there is a bit of a, as you and I had talked about before, I've traveled the world. I've studied with all these different teachers, great spiritual masters from many different backgrounds. But there is a sort of messianic principle there that I call spiritual ego, which, we've talked about spiritual ego, and I think it's easy to fall into spiritual ego and become messianic. So talk to us about training people, and at the same time, because people will nod and do the yes and even sound fairly convincing, but still run off into that messianic process.
Yes.
I've trained them. I know, because I've got people out there teaching my material as if it's their material, and that they're going to save the world. Meanwhile, I've walked away from that part of that world because I want nothing to do with the messianic process.
Yes, totally.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because that is something that we as teachers of leaders have to become cautious of.
Yeah, for sure. So my lesson in that was I once got 13 spiritual awakening teachers in a room together for 3 days, and it was a complete clusterfuck. There was so much egoic game. So that was my first lesson of it. And I remember one of the pretty famous teacher, I invited him, and he said, no, I don't want to go, because the last time I did something like this, it was all subtle ego fights. And my thought process was, that's exactly why I want to do it, because if there's subtle ego fights happening, there's something broken. There's something that hasn't been figured out yet. And like if I make a computer, the first thing I do is I give it to you to see if you can break it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where are the bugs? And what are the bugs in these processes that are happening? And I think that you touched on it exactly, which is that most of these processes are hierarchical, right?
Exactly.
And so you get like the monk who then teaches 300 people and 3 of them become awakened. And this is that hierarchical process. And it just doesn't work, I don't think, for awakening. And I don't think it's the best thing for companies either. And at the same time, there's the second thought process, which is like this collaborative, like we all have an equal say at the table. That shit doesn't work either. I mean, look at any company run that way, and it's a complete mess. So the question is, what's the way that we organize companies so that there is a clear guidance and clear decision-making processes and clear spending processes, and at the same time, it's not hierarchical. And that's really the biggest revolution, I think, that's happening today in business. There's books like the Deliberately Developmental Organization book called The Everyone Culture. There's books like Reinventing Organizations that are starting to touch on this. There's a book called Maverick, way back in the 90s, I think it came out, where he ran his company like this.
Yeah.
And we're just at the beginning of that transition of where companies are saying, hey, our social responsibility is internal as well as external. And if we take that responsibility for these people, that we're just more productive. And that same learning is much in a much slower way going into spiritual communities or teachers. And we need to put it there too. So what we're doing right now is we're creating a partnership like the early Goldman Sachs model, so that I'm not the Messiah, so that we have a community of people that we continue to practice and grow with, and we don't become the answer people, that we continue to iterate and grow, because, it's like, when is an oak tree complete? Like, it doesn't ever happen. There's no end line. That's an ego.
No. Yeah.
We just keep on maturing and evolving. And, you never see a company say, this is the brilliance of a company. You never see a company say, okay, we've made enough money, we're done. We've done enough for the world, we're finished. Like, what makes somebody who has an awakening process go, okay, I'm done? Like, it's not done. It's never done. We're constantly, fortunately.
But that is this. But on the other side of that, that is the society we live in, Joe. I mean, we live in this first place wins world. And the other side of that, the polarity, which is also complete bullshit, is give everybody a fucking medal for showing up, which is also full of shit too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I actually made a video about this this morning, which was I said winning is for losers was the name of the video. And what it talks about was very simply that is if you give it everything you've got, if you put your purpose, your passion, your drive into it, and you don't get the first prize, you're still a winner because you put it all on the line. Because I know, as I've been speaking for 35 years, I know I have stood on stage and got the standing ovation and left, because my wife is always usually with me, and left, and my wife has said, wow, that was really great. They went crazy. And I said, yeah. And she goes, how do you feel about it? I go, it was okay.
Right.
And I've left other times. I did one 2 months ago, and my wife, I always call my wife if she's not with me, and she says, how was the gig? And I go, I was awesome. She goes, what about the audience? I go, they sucked. And so it's not determined externally.
Yes, correct.
It's determined internally. And what I mean by that, and everybody listening to that might go, well, that's very egoic. No, it's not at all. Here's the deal. I'm only there to deliver what I can deliver, and I can't determine what you get. I don't have any control of that. I'm not a messiah. I can't change everybody. I'm a very naughty boy. He's not the messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now piss off, for the Monty Python fans. So I don't get to I just get to determine, my thing is, can I get myself out of the way and let it flow through? And I did that. I did a great job of that. Were they ready for that? No. But I've had other ones where I've gotten the rousing applause, and my ego could feel filled with that, but I know I wasn't out of the way.
Yes.
I know it was my head, and I did a great head job on it, but that doesn't work either. So I want to talk to you about this part as we move in here, which is this, measurable transformation. You talked about measurable states of human development, and you want to make that normal, but immediately we move into measure, we move into comparison.
Yes.
Right. So we're back on like, oh shit, we're dancing that razor's edge again. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right. It's exactly it. So, that's a great question. So, I was involved in a program, one of the things that I experimented with, and they had this measure of consciousness, and it was a good, accurate measure of one part of consciousness. And it immediately became this ego game. And it's the same ego game that I saw when all these awakening teachers got together. So I can totally feel what you're saying, and I know it. And at the same time, sitting on boards for decades taught me that what we measure is critical, and learning how to measure is critical, and that innovations in the way we measure are critical. So, I was in a company recently helping them re-engineer their culture. And one of the things we measured, which I thought was just awesome, was how many meetings people at different levels had in a week. Mm-hmm. It was an easy thing for us to measure, and it was very clearly talked about how efficient the company was. More than X amount of meetings means wholly inefficient. So there are like unique ways of measuring it. And at the same time, as you said at the beginning, there's something that happens, which is when you're ready for a tool, and we got to try to figure that out. Like, when is Byron Katie's work important? When is a Vipassana meditation work important? And it's very hard to do that without measuring anything. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you measure something, and so my experience is that as people move through their developmental phases, they don't ever transcend something, they transcend and integrate it. So like as a early example is a kid's crawling, then they cruise, then they walk, then they crawl, then they cruise, then they walk, and then they don't really get really good at walking until they're 7 years old, right? But they still can crawl. Mm-hmm. And so I think all developmental phases are the same way. That the titration between them is critical. We say that that's lack of progress, but it's not. It's how we frickin' learn. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that always happens is that we integrate it. So we don't let it go. Like, it's just like hierarchical leadership. The next move is into like everybody's herd leadership, but it doesn't frickin' work this works better. So how do we integrate the two into the new form of leadership, into the new form of company structure? And so it's the same thing. Is you've got to integrate it. And the best way to do that is to make sure that those measurements aren't seen as what makes you good. It's destroying people's identity all the time, including.
But it is the human condition to compare. And this is, I mean, I get it, because this is the challenge that we deal with. I mean, one of the reasons people said to me, why did you close down the personal development business? And I said, because I got sick of being in the recycling business. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, they'd done Tony Robbins, they'd done Harbecker, they'd done Landmark, then they came to mine, and they, oh my God, this is like, oh, nobody's gone, this is so deep. And it is. The work we work I do still is very deep. And, we are going to go back to things you have not looked at, not even seen, didn't even know were there. And people are like, oh my God, I should have come here first. And I say, nope. And they go, why? Everything you did made you ready for this. And then I bump into them through. I mean, this is like, they're at the event, like, oh my God, like, heads exploded, souls wide open. Oh, it's transformation for my business, for my life, for my marriage. And then you bump into them 6 months later. How you doing? Oh, I just took a new Tony Robbins program. It was fantastic. It changed my life. Huh? Didn't you do that before? Yeah, but this is different.
Right.
Right. And I'm like, yeah, well, and then they'll tell me what the breakthrough was. And guess what? It's the same breakthrough.
Right.
Because and I think the key word is the word you use, which is integration. And we live in a knowledge-based society. You and I both talked about this, how, we used to believe that content was king, knowledge was the best. And now we know you can go on Google and spend your entire life and never leave Google learning on one subject, get all the information in the world, and you'll still be a mess.
Yeah.
So it's not information, it's integration. It's the willingness to integrate it.
Yeah.
But that is what takes the courage. That's the distinction, is how am I integrating this? How am I taking this out into my world, into my business, into my management, and not comparing, which is so temptation, because people would say, oh yeah, but we had 8 programs, people would say, yeah, but I've done deep. You haven't done deep. Right.
Yeah,
well,
totally.
that deep's the 7-day intensive. You haven't done that. Well, I've done one-on-one with Dove.
Right. Yeah.
You haven't.
I've been going to Burning Man for 20 years. Yeah.
I've been going to Burning Man for 20 years. I did Katie's work. I'm trained in EMDR. Well, I'm NLP master.
Right.
Oh my God! Like, shut up.
Right.
Here's the deal.
So
are you looking at any level of fulfillment?
What made you not iterate to find a way around that? What made you stop instead of iterate to say, okay, there must be a tool or some process that we can do that can eliminate that dilemma? What made you not do that?
Very simply, what actually wore me down on it was the getting past the cynicism of another snake oil salesman. Because part of the problem is there are many people in the industry, as I'm sure you well know, who are shysters, who are wonderful, wonderful people on stage and douchebags off stage, who are ripping people off and who are treating people very poorly and who are definitely messianic. And really fully believe they're not their own nonsense. And to try and convince somebody I'm not that, I'm not interested. I am not interested. You either get it or you don't. And that's why I offered absolute total money back guarantee. Come, don't like it. Here's all your money. I don't care, because I'm not in it for that. But that was the marketing selling of it into that became just exhaustive, because there are, unfortunately, and it's not the personal development world, it's every world, that there is, there are people in the consulting and strategy business around leadership, who I'm, oh, well, we brought a consultant in, well, I'm not that guy. Yeah. And I don't argue with it anymore, but it's not based on all the other people anymore. So it's, I honor and support and recognize and tip my hat, tug my forelock to you, and I respect it, and I'm still involved in it. I just don't have my own company. I still do it. My company is not doing that for the public. We do it privately. We do it for private companies. We do it for select group of CEOs, and it's by, as yours is, by invitation, which is a little sweeter.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think that the measurements that I like the best as far as transformation goes is the physical body. So for instance, if I had a really critical parent, this is going to start happening to me. You see a lot of CEOs with the critical parent hunch, right? And they'll marry the critical wife. If the work we've done with that has really changed them, the hunch is gone. That the facial expressions that are held constantly like that, the repressed anger of that, or, all like the tone of voice, the way that they hold themselves, the softness in their system. So I think a lot of the measures that are really effective aren't the person saying, hey, my life has changed. The effectives that are the measures that we're going for are the things that are often subconscious.
Yeah, there's very much a somatic response.
Yeah.
And,
it can't be faked. The somatic response can't be faked for long.
Some of it can be mastered as a fake, and I can talk about that between you and I separately. But there is micro expressions that cannot
be faked. Exactly.
Like so. For instance, my wife and I were watching something on TV last night, and there was, because I'm trained in micro cues, and just as a simple one, this actress was being asked about something. She's like, "Oh yeah, it was so great, and this is so wonderful." And then he asked her another question, and she went, "Absolutely."
Right. Yeah.
So it was all yes, and then it was like no, while saying absolutely. Well, I'm going to listen to this one, not the absolutely. So you're right. Those kinds of things, people have no conscious clue about it, and they don't even know they're doing it.
Right. Exactly.
And I'll look at somebody, and I'm doing a session with them, and they'll say something, and they'll say something to me, and I'll go, "What was that?" And they go, "What? Was that anger?"
Yeah.
I wasn't angry. Yeah, you were.
You were. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Work is there too.
It's all there.
Yeah.
So but for me, that's not. Well, maybe it's measurement, but it's also a willingness to be very aware. And I think that part of the consciousness journey is the willingness to be very aware. The challenge with it, again, is the comparative mind. That many leaders are now wonderfully, it's great, embracing emotional intelligence. What's shitty about it is they're embracing emotional intelligence to use on someone else.
Right, exactly.
So, I saw that in you. Well, try using the frickin' mirror.
Yeah. The other thing I think about is that, a part of my work is in what I call like the direct intervention, but a large part of my work is in the what I call the clock on the wall intervention. So if I wanted to, let's say my goal was to make you more scared, I could invite you to my yoga class where I scare the bejesus out of you and show you films of scary stuff, right? And then I would up your cortisol level. I could measure that, and yes, I made you more scary.
Right.
Or I can just give you a clock on the wall, and that's going to up your cortisol level. That's going to create more fear, right? So it's the structural changes that can happen. So as an example of this, like in a company that we have, that I've been consulting with, we've created this new thing where anytime anybody feels like somebody in the room is speaking from ego, they whack this thing that sustains a 30-second sound, and everybody has to be silent when that happens. There's no discussion over it. There's just silence. Now, for the first 3 weeks, the meetings were very not productive because it was constant banging.
A lot of quiet.
Now there's crazy productivity, and you don't have to go into anybody's past or future. There's just really cool, dozens and dozens of interventions you can do. And that's why I'm so focused on companies and business, because if we do that in companies, we're touching tens of thousands of people. And it's like, nobody said, hey guys, I want Americans to all look like this all the time. But we did it. We created it. And there was nobody said, this is something that I want from my life. I want to be in my screen 8 hours a day. But it happened. So we can do the same thing in ways that bring people closer to themselves and into deeper connection. And that makes for really good business.
Yeah, that's actually really great. I like that a lot. And that like you said, there's no deep digging there, but just that awareness, and it creates a level of self-awareness. Is like, well, we dung the bell, and you don't get to argue. Well, I wasn't in my ego. We just have to go silent. I just love that tool. That's a great, simple tool because it's confrontive without being confrontive.
That's right.
It's like, it doesn't ask you to say, well, what, I mean, you might want to do it when you get outside the room, but for now you just got to shut up and be silent for 30 seconds, which is painful for many people.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you come back and say, hey, I wasn't an Ingo, boom, it gets banged again. And there's so many cool tools like that you can put inside of a company that just change everything without any direct intervention.
Yeah. And that is why, like I said, that's why I stopped doing the public, but I really love the corporate, because one of the things I was asked years ago is why are you starting to work with, particularly with companies? And I said, because my most productive people come in because they're high driven.
Yes.
And so they become very driven to this. It's a shitty thing to do, but I know that they'll hit that wall and they'll go, okay,
we'll figure it out.
I got to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
And so they were more driven. It wouldn't. So it's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to now use your ego on you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. So and the only problem I have with corporate work is that, which I love, but I haven't quite gotten a corporation to go to the depths yet. There is some really cool deep tools, and it's like, I think we have one that's coming up, one of the big Silicon Valley firms that are interested in like the Navy SEALs training for their managers. And that's super exciting to me, because that's where you get to really see the shift in a way that makes it possible for them to be the managers to instigate these tools that we're talking about. Because you have to be the right kind of manager to be willing to be called out for being political or being hushed by a bell. Right? That's a lack of control that anybody can do. And you have to be that person to make that happen.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah.
It really is. Tell us, because you are now, you're a bit of a cutting edge in that you're really seeing this now as companies becoming centers for personal transformation.
Yes.
And when I say that, I'm not, and you look at it as I do, there's a ripple effect. It's not just becoming a place of transformation for the people who work with me, but the people who work for me and for those we do business with. Talk to us a bit about that ripple.
Yeah, I see it like in the 70s, you could be a businessman or you could be an environmentalist. And somewhere in the 90s, you could be both. And there was a whole bunch of people who profited a tremendous amount from the fact that they were both. The CEO of Walmart in 2006, took the light, because an employee told them, took the light bulbs out of the Coke machines and $3.5 million of savings to Walmart because they put the lights out of the Coke machine in the break rooms, just from that one action. Mm-hmm. So similarly here, the next movement in organizations isn't I can be spiritual or I can be in self-development or I can be in business. It's I can be both. Yes. And not only can I be both, but that's what's happening and to make me more effective. And the ripples are amazing. To see, let me see if there's one. Working with this one team that went from in one of the big alphabet companies, went from one of the lowest self-ranked teams and one of the lowest self-ranked managers to one of the top 6 in the company. Wow. In a 3-month period of time, because the team now loved coming to work and loved working together, and it wasn't political, and they felt supported and they knew they could get it done. Like when people see that social intelligence, social emotional learning isn't something that's nice, but it creates a life that you want, it's over. And so now the other people in those groups are like, hey, I want some of that. And so once they know that there's a possibility of it, once they know there's a taste of it out there, and I think that the main thing that happens that I do differently than one of the innovations that we're doing is trauma is created in relationship. it can't be healed by yourself. You heal it in relationship. And we know that in psychological tests say that groups of people help themselves develop better than individuals doing the same work. So how do you create that level of trust? And it's not safety, it's trust, meaning I know that we can have conflict and we will come out better people on the other side. Not, I trust you to be nice.
No.
And when people get that and they realize they can bring their whole selves to the thing, it's, oh man, like they want it, and everybody wants it. There's nobody who doesn't want that. I don't care if you're a narcissistic CEO or if you're like a, guy in the mailroom who's like, this company sucks. Everybody wants to feel like they're part of a team that's supportive and gets stuff done and is not political.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that, in one of my events, I talk about how do you know who you can trust? And I ask that question, how do you know who you can trust? And people give me all kinds of feedback, blah, blah, blah. And I say, so let me give you an example. You have an important decision to make. And you have two people you can go ask. And one of them is always so sweet and so kind and very loving and nurturing. This person loves and cares about you.
Yeah.
And the other person, well, they're a little bit brash. They're a little bit, they could phrase things a hell of a lot better, but they will never blow smoke up your ass. And this is an important life-changing decision, who you're going to ask. And the answer is you're going to ask both.
Yeah.
You're going to ask both. You're going and you're going to ask both, but the advice you're going to follow is the one who doesn't blow smoke up your ass, because we don't trust people who are nice. Yeah. We trust people who are trustworthy. And there's a big distinction between the two, right? Like, and I have often said, and I've actually wrote articles on it, nice guys are assholes, because you can't trust a nice guy because we're so busy trying to be liked that we say the right things. But if you want to be trusted, you have to tell the truth. Now, you don't have to be brutal about it. Of course, you need kindness and compassion and empathy and all those things, but you need to still say, here's my truth, how I see it. And I think that your point around trust is you're absolutely right. Like you talked about, we're wounded in relationship, but we can only be healed in relationship. And it's not necessarily with the same person, but it's with a similar circumstance.
That's
and we
right.
need that. And the mind will make up what's similar. It's got nothing to do with you.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, this, but this is a man and this issue's with my dad. It's got nothing to do with gender. It's got to do with issue, right? I know I was in relationships with girls who were my dad and my mom.
Right.
And it was like,
exactly.
Oh, I parented.
And the cool thing is, in a company, they're all happening. And so you've got the employee who's rebelling against dad, the boss, right?
Exactly.
And if you can take that situation and have them stop rebelling against dad because who's the boss, who was the authority figure in their life that was abusive, that they had to rebel against, and you fix that whole situation, the team is more productive, everybody's happier. And the cool thing about business is all that trauma is right there, because it's
every day.
Size is about like a family size, and it's just
Yeah. This is one of the centers of the work that we do inside of companies is family dynamics. Understanding human dynamics is family dynamics, is corporate dynamics. And as much as we'd like to think we have a professional self and a personal self, it's all transferable, and it gets transferred and you don't have any say in it. So, and there's also developmental stages of relationship that are going to show up, and that's just the way it is. We are already moving towards the end. I've had a great time chatting with you, and you and I could talk a lot more about this. But I believe that leadership is, in many ways, an act of courage. What is the most courageous decision you've had to make as a leader? Something that really felt like, geez, I really don't want to do this, or this would be really tough, but you've done it because you knew it was the right thing for you.
Yeah. So just on the premise for a second, I do believe leadership requires a certain amount of courage. The main thing I would say is that to see that leadership and authority are very different.
Absolutely. So no way I'm making this about
I know you're not.
Status.
Yeah. And so I'm distinguishing the two, because courage to do something that creates authority is different than for me and I think they're often seen as the same thing. Leadership
Absolutely.
is, I'm going to go and take the risk before anybody else takes the risk. And I am going to live in a future that I'm assuming is already here, right? I'm going to act as if the future I want to live in is already here. I'm acting that way. And that's kind of leadership. And so probably the most courageous thing, or a very courageous thing that I've done is in leadership. It seems subtle. I have all sorts of big ones, like, stopping a company, but the one that actually is most meaningful to me was the recognition that the company I wanted to run and be a part of wasn't based on what would work. It wasn't based on the best strategy. It was based on what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And that what I wanted, I could trust that to be the right course, that it wasn't all the business knowledge of watching dozens of companies rise and fall. It was just like, I don't want to work with that kind of person. Like, I don't, like, I have a thing, it's like static to noise ratio. I don't want to work with anybody who has a lot of static and a little bit of signal to noise, a lot of static and a lot of noise and not very much signal. I want really strong signal and very little noise. I will work by myself rather than work with people that way. And so my recognition of constantly coming to the table and saying, I don't have a good reason for it outside of it just doesn't feel right for me. And I'm not going to control you guys with it, but I am not going to do it. I'm just not working with that, or I'm just not going to I'm going to turn down this multi-million-dollar deal because the guy is a prick. Like,
right. Yeah, I get it.
And those are the moments of courage for me, because it's not a should, it's not a have to, it's just I want, and trusting that want as what is my natural, authentic movement has been the biggest movement in me recently.
Yeah, I love that. I believe courage is incredibly subjective. There are things I do that people look at and go, wow, that's so crazy. It's like, no, it's not for me. And there are other things that people are like, well, that's easy. And I'm like, no, for me, it's freaking terrifying.
Yeah.
And subjective. And so that's why I love asking that question, because people, I think egoically, we want to give the big answer, but oftentimes it's a very small answer. It's just something that was like, Jesus, this was really scary, but I did it. Like, I used to do adrenaline sports all the time. There was nothing scary about it for me. Would be now, but then there was nothing scary about it for me. But standing up and saying to somebody that you love, you know what, I'm really hurt by that, can be massively courageous.
Massively courageous. Yeah, I have a guy in one of our leadership training things, and he was one of the top base jumpers, and he basically said, I totally learned how to overcome my fear, and now I have to tell my girlfriend what I really want. And it's a whole nother level of fear.
Right, and that's it. Yeah. So as we come to the end, I want to run through quickly with our speed round. You ready for this? All right. What makes you cry? What makes Joe cry?
Almost anything.
Yeah,
I cry all the time. What makes me cry the most is watching my children.
How old are your kids?
They're now 8 and 13.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I can get misty just thinking about it.
I see that.
Yeah.
What makes you cry laughing?
What makes me cry laughing? I really like wrong humor. I like really bad, dirty, wrong.
Irreverent humor.
Oh, super irreverent. If it has, like, if it takes something sacred and puts it with something extremely wrong, that's my humor.
Oh yeah, me too. You and I need to go for a couple of tequilas together. What was your most difficult inner demon that you've had to battle?
Tobacco.
Tobacco, really?
Tobacco. Oh yeah.
Oh, how long have you been tobacco free?
Oh,
10
I've
minutes?
been tobacco free half of my life, from 13 when I started till today.
Wow.
But it hasn't been the same. It hasn't been a clear this half and this half. I've been like, I smoked and I didn't smoke, and I smoked and I didn't smoke, and smoked and didn't smoke. It's now been years without it. But it's just, it wasn't until very recently that the flip came where it was, where it was seen as something I don't want to do instead of something I'm not allowed to do.
Oh,
That
really
changed
cool.
everything. That changed everything. So yeah, so the struggle has been until recently, but the tobacco itself, I've never been a heavy smoker.
Wow.
Or used it consistently. I haven't been unhappy with it, but haven't been happy with it.
Right, I get it.
Yeah.
What's something you learned in the last 24 hours?
Something I learned in the last 24 hours is that you have to hold narcissists extremely tight if you don't want to get lost in their world. Meaning that if you're dealing with a narcissist, you have to create enough dominant container space, so to speak. Like you have to like really solidly put them there, let them thrash about for a while until they can feel safe, because what they never got was a consistent, strong container.
Fantastic. I love that.
Yeah.
And final one in this before we get to our last question, which is in a parallel universe.
Yeah.
What work do you do? Where are you in?
In a parallel universe, God, that's such a hard question. I feel so aligned in my life. What would I do? I think I would revolutionize parenting.
Fantastic.
I would take on parenting and change that world.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our final question before we finish, which is, I would love for you to just give our viewers, our listeners, one piece of practical guidance that they could go away and do immediately. What's the one thing you know, based on everything you've talked about, that you would want them to go do this and to integrate, because we talked about integration, to integrate what we've talked about?
Yeah. First of all, because we haven't mentioned it, joehudson.com.
I'm going to give you a chance to get to all that in a minute.
Okay, cool. Piece of integration that I would say, piece of integration is, I think, especially for executives, you hold a lot of tension in your life, and that means that you probably have a lot of repressed anger. And anger that is repressed can look like this: I'm not angry. Or it can look like this: you fucking son of a bitch, why didn't you do the thing? Both I consider repressed anger. And we think in our society that anger has to be at somebody, but anger doesn't have to be at somebody. You can actually let your anger go in the car ride to work and back. And if you think that you're not angry and you're an executive, you need this more than anybody else. So integration, 20 minutes on your drive twice a week, yell, scream, get upset, 20 minutes. Don't let your logical thoughts say you have no reason to be angry. Just allow all of your thoughts to happen, and then see what happens when you get home with your kids and your wife, and see how much more patient you are. Because when we let our anger go, and unresisted anger looks like clarity, it looks like determination, which is what we want. But if you have it bottled, then it gets messy. And so that's what I'd say.
Fabulous. Society does not allow us to have anger. And in the words of the great Johnny Lyman of the Sex Pistols, anger is an energy. Anger is an energy. Let the road rise with you. It's simply an energy. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's energy. Let it go, move through it, and it can become the force and the power that will move you through. If you don't get angry and pissed off about some things, you'll never do anything in your life. I love that piece of advice. Joe, this has been awesome. I've loved our conversation. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can go to tap into all the wonderful resources you have. I know you have a YouTube channel. I know you have your own websites. I know you put on events. So please let us know where we can go find out more. And we'll post all that in the show notes.
Yeah, for the companies, joehudson.com. For public stuff, viewworkshops.com. Those are the two places that you can find all the YouTube and everything else that you want from those places. That's all you need to do. Yeah, there's a book and everything else, but you'll find it.
Okay, so tell us the book.
No book.
No book.
No book. No.
But you can book for those events.
Oh, for booking, yeah. Viewworkshops/workshops.com is how you can book. Yeah.
So you can book for the workshops, right?
And like you said, we're exclusive. So we open up our 2-day to anybody, but then you have to be invited to the to the longer workshops, the more intense stuff, because you need to be ready for the work.
Yeah. Absolutely. My friend, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. It was genuinely a pleasure. And for you, dear listener, remember that information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. You can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to our Facebook page, Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. Find us on there. You can hire me, Dov Baron, as your speaker or your strategist for your organization by going to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. And be aware that the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies face exactly the same challenges you do. They're spending time, money, energy, effort attracting, training, and developing top talent, and they're finding that they're losing that talent fast. If you are frustrated with investing in training and developing your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friends, stay curious about how your business may indeed be the catalyst to consciousness, to your own and every life that you touch. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am